Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am joined by the fantastic Cameron Johnston. Thank you so much for joining me, Cameron.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. I always love chatting books and authors and writing, and we've got a few other topics to talk about today, including swordsmanship and archaeology and mythology. You've got quite the background there for you, so I'm so excited to
All
learn
great
more.
things. All great things.
Yes. So, how about we start off with could you introduce yourself and your upcoming book because you have a new one coming out?
I do. I'm Cameron Johnston. Hi, folks. So I've written my fourth book, which is a standalone called The Last Shield, which is being pitched as a gender-flipped Die Hard in a castle. And unlike some slick marketing you may get in some back of the books, it kind of is like that.
Okay.
You are going to get that.
I'd love to know the story of how that pitch came about.
Oh, wow. Two separate streams there. Um,
Okay.
when I had my first book picked up by Angry Robot, and well, it was published in 2018, so it would have been 2016 they picked it up.
Okay.
There's always a little bit of delay. The head of Angry Robot at the time, it was called Mark Gascoigne, and he said, we love all of these books, but we're not the ones that hold the purse strings. The marketing types, the people that owns the company, they hold the money. They
Mm.
essentially get the ultimate say of what gets made. So what the editors have to do is when they go into these acquisition meetings is they have to explain the books to these people. So like booksellers, marketing people, execs, and they have to say, right, we've got this great book. Here's what it's about. And if they can't explain what the book's about, just saying it's awesome, it's really hard to get it through these acquisitions.
Right.
So I've always kind of borne that in mind. So if
Mm.
I write a book that's Die Hard in a Castle, they know immediately what it's about.
Yeah.
So it's always kind of in the back of my mind. Um, and with my first book as well, even before that was picked up with an agent, um, several of my friends also had manuscripts.
Okay.
We're all unpublished, and we were all about to take that leap to sending it to agents.
Mm.
So we were sitting down with Peter Newman, who wrote The Vagrant,
Yes.
and he's like, "Oh yeah, so tell us what your book's about." So you give all the blurb and all that kind of stuff, and he says, "Okay, what's your elevator pitch?" You've
Mm.
got about 30 seconds, and you go,
Yeah.
uh, "I think we probably need one of those before we send it out."
Yeah, it's tricky. I do a series here on the channel called Indie Spotlight, and it's to showcase books. And really, it started off by doing a description of the book, and viewers didn't want that. And it turned into elevator pitches, and
Mm,
there are
yeah.
so many out there that have them. But then the ones that don't, I reach out to the authors and I'm like, "Hey, can you give me a one line pitch for the book for,
Mhm.
And more often than not, there's a lot of hemming and hawing. I don't know if this is good, but I'm going to send it to you. And there seems to be a lot of struggle
Mhm.
with finding that one line
It's
pitch.
really difficult because when you're sending your book out to an agent,
Mm,
usually they ask for a synopsis as well, which is
yes.
just the most soul destroying thing. You take your amazing book and you suck all the life out of it,
Sounds
all
about
the
right.
goodness. And it is just so they can read it and go, all right, okay. So I liked your first three chapters. I want to see if this goes in a horrible direction. So they just skim through it.
Yeah.
But so it's all just nuts and bolts, step by step kind of thing.
Mm,
But as an author trying to write that, you're just like, oh, this takes all the joy out of it.
right. And then you don't want to spoil anything either,
Oh no, in the
right?
synopsis, you want to spoil everything.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So it's a book
you
blurb
tell
on the
me
back.
exactly what happens.
Oh. I see how that would take all the soul out of it for you. A lot of that
Exactly.
creativity
There's no
gone.
mystery. And then you have to do an elevator pitch. So, you take
Yeah.
that again and you try to distill your entire book down to that kind of one line. How do you pick that line?
Yeah. So when you're writing a book, do you go in trying to think, okay, this is the kind of story I'm going for. How would I pitch this as a one line, or do you do it after the fact?
I think it's always in the back of my mind,
Okay.
um, how you might describe it to someone. I mean, with my
Right.
last book, Maleficent 7, I was like, okay, 7 fantasy villains protect a town. You know,
Yeah.
that tells you exactly what it is. I mean, you lose all the nuance, all the fun, but that is what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say sometimes it's quite difficult,
Mm,
um, because my first 2 books, trying to distill those down, that'd be difficult, a lot more difficult. I only
okay.
ever got it down to sword and sorcery meets film noir.
Okay. That still gives you a setting. It gives you a
Just
tone,
get the
right?
flavor of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really all you need, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the oddest thing push like sell books. So there are some where one was a vengeful chicken. I've had comments being like, "I'm sold," just on that comment.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, talking cat sold.
Hmm.
I want to read about the talking cat. Who cares about the main plot?
Cat general, I'm sold.
Yeah, there you go. And we have Bo with us this morning. Good morning, Bo. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're doing well too. So, if anyone watching also has questions for Cameron here, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll be going between your questions, comments, and our discussion today. But we're here to celebrate Cameron and his upcoming book, and it's called The Last Shield. So, definitely go check that out. It's coming out on August 13th,
It
right?
is. So immediately after WorldCon,
Oh,
although I
perfect.
believe there might be some rogue copies a little bit early.
So, if anyone's in that area, you know where to go. You know what table to go to. And you're going to be there yourself, right?
Oh yeah, yes. I mean,
Brilliant.
it's right in my backyard essentially, so
Oh,
20-minute
beautiful.
walk. So I'm kind of obliged to go.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad it's not a far trek because it's, I know when traveling gets involved, it just adds to the stress when you're
Oh yeah.
trying to
Hmm.
do all of that. So, talking about your books and the ones that you published, I believe you have 4 published to date. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Well, with this one 4,
With this one 4. Okay.
and
And
I'm just about to hand my 5th in as well. So,
wow.
yeah,
So you're just
another
rolling them
standalone.
out.
Well, very slowly, yeah.
Okay. So, when was the first book published? Just to give us a timeline.
That was 2018,
2018. Okay.
and
All
then
right.
God of Broken Things out in 2019.
Right. Wow.
So I made the wise decision of starting to write that before my first book was picked up. So
Mm,
I had half of that done already, fortunately.
wow. All right. Well, we're going to be diving into that a little bit later on in the chat because I have questions about how you manage that whole process, your interests, and everything else. But let's dive into your interests first because I feel like you've got quite a broad scope there of different hobbies and interests. The first being that you're a swordsman.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Wow. I mean, I always wanted to play with swords. I grew up wondering about castles
Mm,
and museums, and my mum and dad would take me to every castle. I
right.
also probably will be watching, so hi, mum and dad. Yeah, so every castle in Scotland, down to Wales, explore those castles. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so always grew up wanting to play with swords, and then eventually I seen an advert for just a kind of, it was a startup company. They'd hired a
Mm,
hall somewhere, and they were starting to do, it was Scottish broadsword at the time.
right.
Uh, so I went along to that, and had very little kit at the time. Um, Historical European martial arts is a much bigger thing now than it was then, uh,
Okay.
with a lot more safety equipment.
Yes.
I'm sure you can appreciate.
Yes, we were chatting about that earlier.
Yeah, so we did some Scottish broadsword.
Yeah.
That company, Academy of Historical Arts in Glasgow, got quite a bit larger, and they eventually got their own premises called the Vanguard Centre.
Okay.
And yeah, so they do archery there. I did longsword, quarterstaff, a whole
Wow.
range of things. Um, Sword and shield as well. That's an interesting one.
Oh, have you done that one yourself?
I have, yeah, just I've done little bits of all of it.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so yeah, a little bit of experience with lots of different things, but not an expert in any of them.
Well, you're exploring still, right? And sometimes those things take a long time to learn because the physical demand of it too takes training.
Oh yeah,
It takes time. So out of the ones that you've done, do you have a favorite?
I loved quarterstaff.
Oh,
That was so
really?
much fun. It's very difficult to spar with it
Okay.
because essentially you've got a heavy wooden stick and it
Yeah.
whips around. It has such force behind it.
Right.
If you hit someone in the wrong place, that bone is going to break.
Yeah, that would
And
be hard.
you can't really pad the side of your knee enough.
Yep.
Just, yeah,
I could see that.
because there was lots of leg strikes involved, but it's a
Mm.
very delicate area, and your knee's not supposed to bend that way. So,
No, no, knees go one way. They need to stay intact.
but I guess mostly I've done longsword.
Okay.
So it's based on old German treatises. Kind of people have gone through and resurrected them.
Right. And so with those 2 styles, do you mainly practice one now, or do you keep trying to, spread it out a little bit?
I like to spread it out about a little bit and just get some
Yeah.
experience in everything, especially as a writer. Uh,
Yes, I was gonna say.
yeah, it's a really good thing as a writer to do a little bit of all of them.
Yeah. So I'm curious with the quarterstaff, is that, a weapon you've used in any of your books so far?
Not yet.
Okay. Would you like to, considering how much
Definitely,
you prefer it?
definitely. There's a bit in one of the Wheel of Time books where
Mm.
it's talking about a legendary swordsman
Mm.
who'd never been beaten, except a farmer with a quarterstaff took him down.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what would happen.
It's fascinating that you have the experience behind it too, not just the, looking online and researching it. The, physical experience makes a difference
Hmm.
when
I mean,
you're reading and writing.
it's not always about getting things right.
Mm.
It's quite often not getting things wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, the
right.
classic one's horses. Like
Okay.
when authors treat them as motorbikes.
Right.
They never feed them. They never stop. They gallop for 24 hours. All this
Yep.
kind of stuff. And people that know horses, oh, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
They will notice that immediately.
Yes. I'm not as knowledgeable on horses. Um, I've had family members who had horses, but I've always had a fear of them.
Hmm.
But I can still tell, like, I've had pets, okay? I've had dogs, I've had cats, they need to eat. They have an
Exactly.
exhaustion limit, you
Hmm.
know? Horses have the same, so while I don't have the hands-on experience or as much knowledge on horses,
And
I
they
can
eat a
still.
lot.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
well, they're
a
huge.
war. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those horses are huge, so I can see that. So, when did you start with the swordsmanship? How long have you been doing this?
Ooh, I think since about maybe 2015. Uh,
Okay.
I had a little bit of a break before all the COVID lockdowns, and I was
Yeah.
about to dive back into it. And then, of course, COVID happened.
Yeah.
So that took about 2 years out, and I've just started getting back into it in the last kind of year and a half or so.
That's fantastic. Is it one of those things that you can practice and work through forms and stuff at home, or do you need to be with others and sparring and practicing that way?
You can certainly do the basics, yeah,
Okay.
all of your basic strikes and your blocks and all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Very much like martial arts kata.
Perfect. Yeah. I love to
Yeah.
hear that because it's I know when I had because I we were talking about this in the backstage where I had taken a year's worth of swordsmanship as well without the headgear and the protection that you were talking about, and I did get whacked in the head for anyone looking for that context. Um, but it was daunting because there wasn't a whole lot of information when they were posting the course. They didn't say like how you practice, and this was coming I was coming from a background of being a musician. So, as a musician, I knew I had to practice every day. I had like I had a whole regimen I had to do at home so that when I went into class, I could show off the skills. right? Because with
Mhm.
a music lesson, you practice all week, and basically your lesson isn't just your teacher teaching you, it's a performance of everything that you had practiced throughout the week that you were given as homework for the week before, right? So you have to show up and be ready. And it was a little bit different. There was some similarities where you did have to practice, but there were a few things I realized you couldn't really practice without a partner.
It's much more difficult, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of it is heavily dependent on what your opponent's doing.
Yeah.
And of course, if you don't have a garden, how do you practice with your sword?
Don't knock over grandma's vase.
Look at the ceiling and hope for the best. Then of course, if you do have your own garden,
Yeah.
you're out in the garden with a sword, which has its own problem. There's some madman swinging a sword.
Yeah. Get the neighbors calling. You okay over there? So in terms of your other hobbies, you're also a gamer.
Yes, I've always loved my video games.
Brilliant. What are you playing anything right now?
I've actually just finished the excavation of Hobbs Barrow, which is
Okay.
it's like a kind of retro pixelated adventure game.
All
So
right.
it's kind of like Lovecraftian horror mixed with
Yeah.
archaeology, which that's very much my jam.
Love it. And are there games that were nostalgic for you growing up?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think of some of my favorites. Probably the best space combat simulator ever is Free Space 2. Um, People have been modding that for years and
Yeah.
years now, and they've updated all the graphics, and people are still playing it today.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so I would recommend people look at that one.
Okay.
Um, and then, of course, there's the classic Morrowind,
Oh, yes.
Elder
Okay.
Scrolls. So many classic moments. Unlike some of the more modern games, where the enemies scale up with you, this one
Mm.
didn't.
Oh,
So you could wander into a lair somewhere and go, oh, let's find what loot's in there at level 1.
right.
And like, oh, there's an undead lich, and I'm dead.
Yep.
But then you level up, you come back, and you kick its ass, and
Yeah.
there's just so many great moments like that. I very much appreciated. So it made the world feel more alive to me rather than a game.
You're in it for the challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That reminds me a little bit of Dark Souls, at least with that term of
Mhm.
difficulty. I don't know if you've played that one too.
Yeah. Well, I've played Elden Ring, so yeah.
Yes. Very similar.
Died so many times those bosses. Oh.
Oh, I tried Dark Souls and when it first came out, and uh, I did not get far.
Mhm.
I think I got to the second boss, something like that, and I was like, "You know what? My stress levels are not
Mhm.
worth this. I will watch other people play it. This is the kind of game I need to watch other people play because my heart can't take this."
I can empathize with that, yeah.
Yeah, my husband loved it, and he loved that challenge,
Mhm.
but there was a certain point where after, like, the I don't know, 12th try on a boss, so where I
Mm.
was just like, "I
Yeah. I
no."
I I get to that point as well, yeah.
Yeah,
Morrowind wasn't quite as bad as that. You had to be careful where you went, scout
okay.
ahead a little and retreat, and then
Right,
come back
okay.
later, yeah, when you felt stronger. But yeah,
Okay.
really appreciate it, and some of the writing in that game is just it was amazing. Some of the
Mm.
quests. I remember some of them to the day.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's something I think, at least in terms of, like, my parents never got, my husband's parents never got, is that games are stories
Mhm.
more often
Yeah.
than they realize, and I know, like, there was always that, "Well, you should be reading." Well, I'm reading. There's a story in the game. I am
Yeah,
reading the
yeah.
text.
I think this is what people are liking about Baldur's Gate 3. Uh,
Right.
Really good character work and some really, really fun stories.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of praise for that. I haven't delved into it myself just because of the timing with it.
Mm.
There's no video games with a toddler. I tried. I'm at this stage in my life, I need games where I can disappear for 2 months and come back and not have to relearn the game.
Mhm. Yes.
But, I find more and more people love the open world games as well, like
Mhm.
the Hogwarts game that they came out with. I don't
Oh,
know if
I've
you
I've not played that myself.
but that concept of being able to go anywhere and explore
Mhm.
and have all these little side quests, I think people just love coming to that level of
I certainly do.
creativity.
It's
Yeah.
the same thing with Skyrim and Witcher
Yeah.
3. I
Yeah.
just love exploring.
Yep.
Absolutely love that in a game.
Yeah, I didn't get far in Witcher 3 either, mainly because I spent so much time with those side quests. I'm not a productive gamer. I
I
like
mean,
doing all the
I
useless
could just
things.
spend, weeks just wondering about Skyrim and then go, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, there was that main quest."
Yeah. I think there was jokes about, Breath of the Wild, the
Oh,
Zelda game that they did, because it was open world, and the whole joke was, like, Zelda's waiting for you to save her, and you're you're off, doing whatever.
yeah, finding turnips and things like that, yeah.
Yeah, not a priority for Link, apparently. So you also have quite a passion for archaeology, history, and mythology, and I'm putting all these 3 together because they influence one another in ways. So we're gonna try and touch a little bit on each one, but in terms of history and a period of history, is there one that is fascinating for you that you absolutely love?
I mean, I do love most of it.
Mm,
Anything, pre-modern,
mm,
medieval, Vikings, Romans, ancient Egypt, anything prehistory, I guess I particularly love. And
right.
part of that, I think, is the mystery. Because it is prehistory, it wasn't written down, or if it was, very sparsely. So we don't really know what these people were like, what they did. So it's a best guess kind of situation. I mean, from my personal interests, you've got stone circles and standing
Mm,
stones in Scotland, and every time I visit these places, I'm always wondering what were they really used for.
mm,
You know,
yeah.
what were they to these people? They went to so much enormous effort to construct them. So
Mhm.
there must have been a reason beyond just we're feeling a bit bored and fancy dragging some stones.
Yeah. You would hope, right? But in terms of that, the differences in culture and how they affect the structures that they build, for example, is there something that has really captured your curiosity?
Well, there's been excavation going on in Orkney,
Okay.
just in the islands just north of the mainland of Scotland. It's called the Ness of Brodgar.
Okay.
So I mean, it's 5,500 years old,
Okay.
and they built these enormous structures for the time out of stone. Um, we don't really know why. Uh,
Mm,
some of them seem to be structures of some significance, but I think it's structure 10. One of them fell into disuse, and then people didn't use it for a century. And then they came back and they had an enormous feast before burying the entire site.
wow.
And this feast had 400 cattle. So that feeds about 200,000 people.
Whoa.
And
Yeah.
you're talking like about 3,500 BC.
Yeah.
That's for that time period in that place. That's an enormous amount of people and
Yeah.
cattle, just absolutely enormous. And I want to know why,
Yeah.
but I'm never going to know.
Yeah.
Has its pros and cons. You get the mystery, but you also want to know.
Yeah. And I imagine, with, religious impacts throughout history as well, that likely impacted the type of celebrations they had, why
Mhm.
they would gather, and it just the more you think about it, the more layered it
Mhm.
becomes.
Absolutely. And there's these carved stone balls that are found all over the kind of north
Mm.
of Scotland. No one knows
Okay.
what they're for.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's also Roman artifacts,
Right.
dodecahedrons, that they're made out of brass and
Yeah.
they're hollow. And again, no one knows what they're for.
Right. I it
Mystery artifacts.
It's fascinating because we could come up with all of these theories, and at the end of the day, it could have been a child's plaything,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I mean, there's always the temptation to say, "Oh, it's ritual," it's
Right.
religion, and was it? Was it
Yeah.
a child's toy?
It's it's interesting because, us looking back, I mean, for myself, I'm like, "Why didn't anyone write about their lives, just their day-to-day lives in a way that we could find?"
Hmm.
But unfortunately, time is not so kind, and in the terms of those people probably had really difficult lives, probably weren't literate in many places that they could have written. So it is unfortunate that those things are
Yeah.
lost to time, but
I mean, I did take some influence from kind of later Celtic society,
okay.
with the 'cause I do use druids
Mm,
in the Last Shield. There's so little that was written down, and that was all by Greeks and Romans who, had their own agendas.
right.
So take everything they say with a bucket of salt.
Yes.
But yeah, it's everything we know about them really is from those snippets and a little bits of archaeology and I guess tradition and folklore that might have survived.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad we did preserve what we could and what we can find what we can today, because I imagine the technology that we have now has changed the archaeological field over
Hmm.
the years too. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, in the olden days, they dug up so much context looking for, I don't want to say loot, but artifacts. Yeah,
Yeah.
if it was gold, even better.
Right. Of course. Yeah, so and you've also traveled to some of
Oh yeah.
these
Mhm.
ancient sites.
Yeah, so lots of sites in Scotland.
Yeah.
Stonehenge. That was one of my big bucket list items.
Yeah.
Um, so people said, "Oh, you're a bit disappointed if you go. It's not as big as you think." It
Right.
was exactly as big as I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
That's
Um,
wonderful.
I've also been over to Peru.
Okay, yes.
Seen lots of the sites there. Machu Picchu was,
Right.
again, it's one of those bucket list places that was incredible.
Mhm.
And the Nazca lines as well.
Okay.
Um, just in the desert there, and the massive geoglyphs.
Right.
Flew over those in a plane, taking photos.
Mm. Yeah. So is there one you haven't been to yet that you would love to do, like the top of your bucket
Plenty.
list?
Plenty. I guess it's Orkney for me. Uh,
Okay.
I've not made my way up there yet. I've
Right.
been meaning to for years, so I need
Yeah.
to get that done
Oh, yeah.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you're closer than I think a good chunk of the world, so
Yeah,
yeah, your odds are good.
I think so.
And in terms of, that love for history and mythology, how has your passion for those things impacted your writing and your storytelling?
Well, I mean, I think it kind of influences everything I write. You get that sense of deep time.
Right.
You know, there's all these people and places that came before you, and
Mm.
some of them you won't know what they are. I mean, you'll get this yourself from video games.
Yeah,
The dungeons. You're like, oh, this is so cool. Where does this go? What does that do? And
yeah.
yeah, so I just love all of that. And then when you mix it up with kind of folklore and mystery, yeah, I love all of that. All of that, it all just comes together for me.
I love it. And is there a specific, folk tale or myth that you personally love coming back to that kinda lives rent free in your brain?
Probably not so much the tales as general kind of supernatural creatures.
Okay,
Um,
interesting.
so like the Fae and the
Mm,
old Highland folk tales. I love all of that kind of thing.
yeah. Those are a lot darker than I think
Well,
people say when you say, I love the fae and the fairies and stuff like that, and I think at least in terms of when I've talked to people, they're like, "Oh, you like the little pixie little fairies that are all cute
mm,
and adorable," and it's like, "No, not
well,
those kind. No,
yeah,
these ones are scary."
I suppose the best way to compare it is, like, oh yeah, so you like fairy tales? Yeah, the German ones.
Yeah.
You know, they are dark.
Yes, I've heard a couple of them, the children's ones in
Mhm.
particular, and I can't remember his name, but the little boy with the thumbs.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
Oh, yeah, go look it up, people, if you're if you're curious about what that one is. But
Yeah, it's not Disney. No.
no, no, don't expect happy ending there. But we have Tim McKay with us as well. Welcome, Tim. Always good to see you. And for all of you watching as well, you can pop your questions to Cameron in the chat. Feel free, we will get to them. But until we see those questions, we're going to keep going with your writing because at this point, you've written the 4 books. You've got a fifth that
Yeah.
you've gotten under your belt too. When did all this start? At what point did you say, "Hey, you know what? I've got a story in my head. I want to put it on paper, and I want to publish this."
Probably about age 5.
Oh wow!
Discovering fantasy books, and
Mm.
you know, these have dragons in it. Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and yeah. So most kids make up stories themselves anyway. So
Mm.
it's just kind of natural extension to want to write your own book. But
Yeah.
wanting and being able to are very different things. Um, so yeah, I guess I'd written little bits and pieces over the years, but it wasn't until I was in my early 20s I thought, do you know what? I'm really going to try and write a book.
Yeah.
Multiple failed attempts, around about 20,000 words. Um,
Okay.
and I did eventually write one, which no one's going to see.
There's
Uh,
always I at this point, every author I've talked to has one in the vault.
so then I wrote another one, and no one's getting to see that either.
Oh, there you
Yeah.
go.
So I guess I was sitting there going, right, I've finished these books, but they're not quite right. I don't really know how to fix them.
Right.
Um, so I joined a local writers group,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
and I worked on short stories for a few years.
Nice.
So I learned more about self-editing, how to critique other people's stories, like,
Yeah.
and get some of my own critiqued. And when I felt like I was a better writer, I decided the time was right.
Mm.
So then I started writing The Traitor God after a prequel short story did quite well. I wanted to keep it going.
Right.
So I was like, right, I'm going to write a whole book about this guy.
Okay. I appreciate that you took the time because that's a lot of time to dedicate into practicing the
Hmm.
writing craft before you actually put it out in the world. That's a lot of self-education in the terms of, like you said, you joined writers groups, you had to learn about editing, critiquing, but you also had to learn about yourself and how you tell stories and
Absolutely.
improving on those skills as you went along.
And some of that was learning what not to do.
Right.
Because some of the failed attempts I did at novels, it was because
Okay.
I didn't have a plan. Uh,
Right.
so I had like a cool character or a cool starting idea, but I
Mm,
didn't know where it was going, so it just petered out.
right.
And then other ones, I did the whole thing of I'll plot this whole story out piece by piece by piece, chapter by chapter. Um, but by the time I get to the end of that process, I have no interest in writing it.
So you
I'm
need somewhere in the middle.
bored. Exactly. So
Yeah.
I do a kind of a scaffolding thing where I
Okay.
have a start scene, but I also know the end scene,
Right.
and I've got maybe half a dozen points in between that I want to hit. So
Yeah.
I've always got somewhere I'm heading for. But if the characters want to go off piste a little bit, that's totally fine. We can do that. But
Yeah.
then I can rope them back into where I want to go.
That's excellent. It's I know there's a lot of talk about pantsing and plotting and all the different kinds of authors, but at the end of the day, I think most authors end up somewhere in the middle because
Hmm.
you
I'm definitely more on the pantsing side of things.
yeah. Okay, interesting.
But as long as I have that little bit of framework, that's enough for me.
Yeah. Okay. It's yeah, that's a fascinating process. It's different for everyone, but I love that you go with the flow too. And Bo here says, I haven't read anything by him yet, so no questions from me. I'm just here to learn and listen as I picked up a copy of The Last Shield from the Broken Binding.
That's magnificent beast of a book. I'm thoroughly pleased with that myself.
Yeah, excellent. It's been getting some wonderful praise, which actually we'll go into because you were talking about earlier your elevator pitch. It's a gender flipped fantasy die hard that people have been saying it's action packed, quite the page turner. So with those comment and those things in mind, what do you hope readers walk away with after they finish The Last Shield?
I mean, it's at this point I just want to break out the gifts.
Okay.
So, that scene in Gladiator? Are you not entertained?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, that's my biggest compliment. If people enjoy the yarn, they
Yeah.
enjoy the characters, enjoy the action, enjoy the story. That's all that I want, really.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Entertainment is a huge factor, and I think one of when as an au I have to imagine it because I'm not an author, but as a reader, I would imagine the best compliment you can get is this, I couldn't put it down. I was so entertained, I couldn't put it down.
I mean, for myself, there's all those books. It's 2 a.m. Oh, like one more chapter.
Yep.
That's a big compliment to me. That one.
Yeah, the only thing that because this is a standalone. The Last Shield is a standalone. But when you get into series and you do that, the trouble is when it ends on a cliffhanger and you've now stayed up to
Mhm,
3 a.m. and now your brain is
mhm,
reeling after you finished on a
absolutely.
cliffhanger and you're like, "Do I start the next one? Is the next one available?" I can't go to sleep.
It's a horrific thing, isn't it?
Oh, it's so
Oh,
terrible. It's fantastic, but terrible. There's
exactly. If the next book's out, brilliant.
Yeah.
If it's not, oh no.
It's yeah. So in terms of genre, because you have such a passion for archaeology and history, what drew you to the fantasy genre instead of just something strictly historical fiction, for example?
Everything's cooler with dragons. You
There
know,
the only answer we need.
magic and monsters.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I grew up reading, X-Men comics,
Mm.
Savage Sword of Conan,
Yep.
reading all these kind of pulp swords and sorcery from the 70s and early 80s.
Yeah.
I love all of that side of things.
Mm.
And also, you can just make things up. If
Yeah.
you if you're trying to do hardcore historical stuff, you better get your research right.
Yeah, because people are not, as kind in critiquing in that case if you
Mhm.
get something a little bit wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I have to ask, as an X-Men fan myself, growing up reading the comics, watching the shows, uh, who was your favorite X-Men? We gotta know.
Well, I mean, Wolverine's always cool, but then you've got Gambit. Mm, effortlessly cool. Then you've got Rogue. Ah, how do you choose? Yeah,
Yeah, I was
all
gonna
of
say Rogue has such a
them. Not
fascinating
Cyclops.
No. 2 one-line stream for you there. Yeah, personally, the love triangle with Jean and,
Mhm,
Wolverine and all of that, I didn't much care for that, but I did find Rogue's history very fascinating,
mhm,
her whole experiences, and then the difficulty she has with her power
mhm.
on
Yeah,
top of that, there, Rogue and
really
Gambit.
interesting. Yeah, and X-Men '97. Oh, that
Yeah.
really worked for me.
Yes. Yeah, I found, Mystique as well.
Hmm.
When you dive into her character, just getting past the surface villain and find out what her past is like, why she does what she does, yeah, that's I feel for her. I mean, that's
Yeah,
tragic.
I was always a big fan of Thor and Doctor Strange as well.
Mm, yeah,
A little bit later on, Deadpool before the movies came out.
yes.
So no, I was into that before it was cool.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, it probably helped them of a certain age.
Yeah. Well, these are I mean, we love stories, we love writing, we love books, but at the same time, that passion started somewhere.
Hmm.
Right? I wasn't an avid reader when I was a child. I struggled with reading. I did the whole hooked on phonics thing when if people are not aware or know what that is, it's torture. It's child torture, in
Hmm.
my opinion. But basically, I love those other stories,
Yeah.
comics. I love TV shows that pulled from these
Yeah. I
gargoyles, you
yeah.
know?
I was the same in school. They
Hmm.
kept trying to push the classics onto us,
Yeah.
and even good books, just wasn't that interested. uh,
Yeah.
in reading about things from the deep south of America. Didn't really have much of a relevance to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was lots of books we just had no interest in. Um, but yeah, every
Yeah.
so often it's like, oh, have you read this? And it's like, oh wow,
Yeah.
spaceship.
So
Whatever gets you reading, really, just whatever you enjoy. Yeah, but
absolutely.
try other things too. See if it works for you.
That's where today I try and read different things, you know? Urban fantasy has always been mostly missed, but recently I've had 1 or 2 that have hit really well, and it's
Mm-hmm.
mainly because they had more fantasy elements than urban, because
Oh,
I'm more
okay.
of a fantasy reader.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have like, I've tried, some that are more, detective oriented in urban fantasy. They've got the magic, but they're mainly you're walking the streets of whatever city, and it's very grimy. I got my own city like that. I don't wanna read about the grime in my city.
I mean, this is what's great. You've got the indie publishers as well.
Mm,
So if they see a gap in the market, but none of the traditionally published folk want to give them a go, they can just
yeah,
put their own thing out. Hire
yeah,
their own editor and get it done and find an audience that way.
yep,
And I really enjoy that.
absolutely. I think one of the biggest ones lately has been cozy fantasy,
Yes.
right?
Mm.
That started off as mainly an indie thing, as far as I know. If I'm wrong, correct me, but, and then it got picked up by trad, and now it's just everywhere.
Yeah. There's definitely a place for it. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I read grimdark. I've, read Anna Smith Spark. That's you need something cozy after reading those books.
I mean, who wants to eat the same thing over and over and over? I mean, I,
Yeah.
I like a bit of variety. I might prefer one sort of book over another generally, but yeah.
So, with that in mind, is there a genre you haven't written yet that you would love to try out?
Ooh, I think a rom-com.
Really?
Mm,
Interesting.
yeah,
What
grimdark rom-com. Yeah, I can see that working.
what is it about the rom-com that you'd love to.
Just something wildly different.
Okay.
I mean, my first two books were first person, kind of like film noir, swords and sorcery meets urban fantasy.
Yeah,
Maleficent 7 was kind of darker epic fantasy.
right.
Um, the last Shield is a little bit more kind of in the vein of David Gemmell.
Yes.
So
Okay.
yeah, it's nice to try new things. I'm not sure I would go for cozy fantasy, but yeah, I could totally do a rom com. Yeah,
I love that.
and then after that, write some horror probably.
Oh, interesting. So you're gonna go for, like, the light comedic romance right
Yeah,
into the terrible horror. I love it. Do them back to back, please. I
I,
would.
might, I would have to use different pen names, I think, though.
Oh. Yeah, so would you write under a pen name
Oh yeah.
if you
Mhm.
had to? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a marketing thing, really.
Okay.
If you're writing, like romance, you don't want
Mm.
to write it under the same name as your horror, and
Yeah,
then your audience is going to get really confused.
right.
Oh, there's a new romance coming out.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I remember when I started getting into reading a lot more in my early, like, my late teens, early 20s, I was so confused by pen names. I was so confused. I would have friends, like,
Mhm,
recommend me books, and I would read them and not realize they were the same author, and
mhm,
thinking, "Wow,
yeah,
this is a lot like this other author I've read."
mhm.
It took me a while to figure that one out.
I mean,
Not.
back in my first convention I ever went to, first writers convention,
Yeah.
Robin Hobb was there.
Oh, wow.
So it was that kind of like table talk, cafe clash kind of thing, where it's
Yeah,
like 20 people sit around a table and have a chat and ask
yeah.
questions. And the pen name did come up, because her name's not
Mm,
really Robin Hobb. and she'd written under other names beforehand. And someone asked, "All right, what do your grandkids call you?" He's like, "Grandma."
Oh. Oh, that's really sweet, though.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, and I can appreciate it too if you have, the desire to keep your life private.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's I imagine that plays a big role in a choice as well. So, in terms of The Last Shield, what kind of setting can readers, expect as well for this one?
Yeah, so it's heavily based on prehistoric Scotland.
Mm,
Um, so the sort of part of the Bronze Age, part of the Iron Age, but they don't have any iron.
okay.
Um, and lots of even then, there's lots of prehistory around. So you've got your standing stones, and
Mm,
you've got druids with the rituals.
mm,
Lots of ancestor worship and kind of like folklore and that kind of thing.
yeah, okay. I mm, that is always interesting because for me, I'm in Canada, for context. I'm in Canada, so we have a blending of different cultures and stories and histories, and um, it's fascinating for me because I do have a part of my side that's from Scotland originally. I don't know how many generations ago because we're doesn't matter, but there's that side of the family that has kept that history alive
Hmm.
and tried to keep those stories, and we pass it down. And it's fascinating when I look at those stories compared to actual, fantasy versions of it,
Hmm.
because they're so different.
They are. They
They're
are.
so you can see where the inspiration is. Absolutely.
Mhm.
But how far authors takes it is much more fascinating in my opinion.
Yeah,
So
I just love taking, even if you don't take the stories,
yeah.
take the feel of it, how it makes you feel, whether it makes you feel kind of uneasy,
Mm,
or you can go the Lovecraft route as well.
right.
You've got the cosmic horror of very old things lurking underneath.
Mm,
I have like sacred places that were they sacred, or were they trying to keep something there?
right.
Who knows what's under stone circles really?
Yeah, and I wonder if we'll ever find out, but I kinda like the mystery of it, if I'm honest, because the
Yeah,
imagination is a lot more fun.
it's quite often, yeah.
I more often than not, I feel like those kind of things, they build up such a suspense with the mystery that the real answer is not satisfying, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
I mean, a lot of things are essentially very boring
Mm,
when you find out what they're really for. I remember reading it was an archaeological article
okay.
from, I think it was like the 50s or the 60s. So a bunch of archaeologists had dug up this home site, and
Mm,
it had shelves and niches in the wall, and they found these little statues that were only ever placed up high.
okay.
And they're like, "Oh, right, okay." So they're clearly up there because that's the highest place in the dwelling. That must be the sacred place. On and
Right.
on and on, ritual, religion, all this sort of things.
Yeah.
And then a female archaeologist came along and went, "Toddlers, you don't put your valuable things on a low shelf."
Oh, that's so true. Even
This,
with
this, yeah,
counters,
this
they
is
go to
my
the
thing
back of
about
the counter.
not everything's religion. It can be something just as simple as that. You just don't know what it's for at that particular time, but there's
Yeah.
often a very simple answer.
Yeah. We like to overcomplicate things.
Hmm.
So with that being the case, um, when you were writing The Last Shield, did you have to do a lot of research regarding the time period, or did you already have the knowledge base for that?
I don't think you can ever have enough knowledge of it.
Mm.
Um, I guess the problem then becomes not so much how much you know
Mm.
as how much you want to put in the book. Uh,
Okay.
because it's not a textbook,
Right.
it's a novel.
Mm.
How much do you put down the page? Because you're really excited about all your research. You want to throw it all into this book, and then it's like, but it's
Yeah.
been like 4 pages since anyone did anything. you're essentially giving us a history lesson, you know?
Yeah.
So it's more a problem on that side of things, on
Okay.
how much to include versus how it affects your pacing of the book.
Right.
Because at the end of the Last Shield, it's an action book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just that, but I don't want to take the readers out of the story with characters in a predicament to
Right.
go off and tell them about how wool was prepared to,
Yeah.
make yarn, which is then woven into, yeah.
Yeah. That's I imagine there's quite a broad group of readers who appreciate that. In terms of Tolkien, one of the biggest jokes is the trees,
Yeah,
right? How long can you
it
talk
says
about trees
true.
for?
Yeah.
So in terms of the books that you've written, which one has been the most memorable for you, either in terms of writing it or in the publishing stage?
I mean, it's bound to be my first book,
Mm,
because that was the discovery of how fun publishing is and what definitely won't go wrong.
right. A lot of lessons learned, I imagine.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, the whole public side of things as well.
Right.
Um, you have to do public speaking, you have to do book launches, you have to do interviews, you
Yeah.
have to go along to your cons and sit on a panel, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, one of my first panels, I was sitting next to Joe Abercrombie.
Oh,
So
wow.
so you're like, wow, I'm like just this like brand new author, and I'm sitting next to proper famous people.
Right. Was
That's
it that must have been a bit of a moment.
Yeah. But then you're like, but I am up here.
Yes. You earned that spot. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We
Uh,
have, Steven in the chat as well saying, and it took I believe that's took forever to being published. Didn't happen overnight.
Absolutely. I mean, I met for context, I met Stephen years before I was published.
Okay. Yeah. So you've got some good friends behind you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things you go to cons and you meet some of your favorite authors.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do remember the people that had time to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ask what you were writing and gave you some good advice and things like that. So yeah, very much appreciated a lot of those authors I met before I was published.
That's a it's an important thing, even in the sphere that I'm in terms of reviewing and making videos and stuff. I had watched so many booktubers and authors before I started all of this, and being able to chat with them and learn and grow, and even just making friends. You can really appreciate the kindness
Yeah,
that they
you
show you.
really can. And one
And
of the things you learn when your book's picked up by a publisher is that you don't
yeah,
know anything.
right.
Unfortunately, I knew people that had been published already. So,
Yes.
I could get advice, I could ask some questions, I could be like, Is this normal? Why is this so dysfunctional?" And they're like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
that's normal. That's publishing."
Well, and we have champions like Steven here who makes videos on those topics as well and makes it available for the public and dives into that for aspiring authors. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
mean,
huge
it's
kudos.
yeah, most of us got help
Yeah,
from other authors at some point, so it's good to pay it forward when you can.
absolutely. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. So with that in mind, do you have a piece of advice that you'd like to share with aspiring authors?
I guess it partly depends on what stage they're at,
Okay.
whether they're just wanting to write. In
Yeah.
which case, I would say don't spend too much time world building,
Mm,
because people
right.
get very carried away designing their empires and their peoples and their politics and their wars, and then you end up with an RPG source book, not a book.
Right.
You don't have a novel.
Need the
Like, where's your
story.
story? Where's your story?
Yeah.
And I guess if people have written,
Mm,
and they're wanting to get better, uh, I would say it's invaluable to contact other writers and critique each other's work. I
yeah.
learned so much from doing that. Uh,
Right.
and it is good advice to write regularly. whatever
Mm,
that looks like for you, whether it's a couple of hundred words every couple of days, yeah, keep the momentum going.
mm.
If you spend like 6 months since you last looked at it, it's hard to get back into the flow.
I imagine you don't know where you left off, you kind of forgotten
You
important
reread it,
details.
it's like like a rolling stone. It's easier to keep it rolling, but if it's stopped, it's harder to get it going again.
Even if it's just a little bit a day, I imagine. Even if
Yeah,
you only
yeah,
get a
yeah.
couple 100 words.
Yeah, or just do some editing. Just
Yeah.
keep it all whirling away in your mind, and a lot of it is just in your subconscious anyway.
Mm.
Keeps thinking about it, even if you're not actively writing.
Yeah. I imagine that part of it can be consuming. When it's all in your head, you know exactly and you get
Mhm.
those spark of inspirations at very inopportune times.
Yes. And you're like, you know what? It's fine. I'll write it down later. I'll remember it. No, you won't. No, take your time.
Or you scribble down a very short 3-word, "This was the idea," and then you come back to it later and have no
Yeah,
idea
yeah,
what you're talking about.
exactly. Yes.
So, you also have another hobby we were talking about earlier, which was blacksmithing.
Yes. Actually, I was speaking to Stephen Arian about that just
Yes.
the other day. He's also forged himself a sword.
Oh, wow.
I've not gone quite that far, but
Wow,
one
wow.
of the things I use regularly is a bottle opener that I made myself.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So as I was saying to you earlier as well, if you have any frustrations, uh, if you have a go at blacksmithing, um, it really works out on the hot steel and the sparks.
Yeah,
It's really good exercise as well.
and
You come out feeling great.
you walk away with a bottle opener or a sword,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can pick your choice or
absolutely.
work your way up.
So I did a kind of basic course where I did I did a bottle opener, a coat
Right.
hook, like a toasting fork, a letter opener, like a small
Yeah.
knife, and that kind of thing, and also a fire striker.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
so you get like a flint and some of your fire steel just to make
Yes.
your light your tinder. So I've got that and I use that as well.
Wow. Are there other things you'd love to make down the line?
I mean, obviously, I would, fantasy author. I'm
Yes.
obviously going to want to make a sword, but
Yeah.
that's a long process to get that good.
Yeah, but you're taking the time to do it, and in that time, you're collecting all these wonderful things that you've made because
Mhm.
that takes a lot of time and a lot of skill too.
I mean, it's
So
when you're writing, fantasy or
mm,
historical fiction, it is good to explore these things.
mhm.
A, it's fun, and B, it's useful when you're writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, the first question I, have is how do you balance all of this? There's so many different hobbies you have, they all take a lot of time and dedication on top of writing, and how do you find the time to balance all of it?
Well, that's a good question. What do I find new? I mean, I guess for me, a lot of them I'm dabbling in. So
Okay.
I'll do a bit and then I'll do something else. And then I'll come back to it a couple of months later and have another go and that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, because I also have a day job as well
Yeah.
as writing and all these hobbies.
Oh my
So
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, it's a matter of scheduling and energy management, I guess.
Yeah, that's it time management skills are they're so difficult to learn. They're so difficult to learn because you have all these interests, these passions you wanna do. All of them are time consuming. All of them are trades in and of themselves, right? There's people in history who would have spent their entire lives just learning swordsmanship or
Yeah, yeah.
blacksmithing.
Hmm.
Yeah, and to
Absolutely.
try and keep it as a hobby while you're also pursuing your writing career on top of your day job, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking if you try a lot of things, try a lot of new things, and
Mhm.
there might be one or two you really enjoy,
Okay.
then you can focus in on those.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you get to explore a lot of things you've always wanted to have a go at.
Yeah.
whether that be pottery or knitting or yarn dyeing, blacksmithing.
Figuring out what you enjoy and what's worth your time.
I mean, as a kid, there was all of these things I always wished to learn.
Mm,
I wanted to be a knight. You know,
right.
so it's like, and now I get to play with swords and write about swords.
Yes. Oh, that's brilliant. I love when those childhood little dreams come
Mhm.
true, right? Because
Yeah.
you think of it nowadays, well, I'm not gonna be a knight, right? Those days are
Mhm.
kind of done and behind us if, but being able to live that in some
Yeah.
form or fashion is wonderful. So I'm going to come back to your writing just quickly here. We're going to wrap up shortly as we're at the hour mark. But I am really curious. Has there been a character that you've written from any of your books that you would love to come back to and write more for that character?
I mean, I guess for me, all of them.
Okay.
Because I'm essentially writing for myself. I write what I
Mm,
want to read, and I massively enjoy my time with all these characters.
yeah,
But I've also got all of these other characters I want to write about at the same time.
that's fair.
Yeah, so there's so many characters in the Maleficent Seven, because
Right.
they're all mad villains, which were just enormous fun to write about.
Yeah, I
So
imagine.
if pushed, I would say one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were just enormous fun writing proper villains, not even anti-heroes.
Yeah, just pure
Outright
villainy.
villains, yeah. No redemption arc, they're just bad.
Yeah, that was something I loved about Anna Smith Sparks' book or, Empire of the Dust trilogy, was that they're all terrible people.
Hmm.
Some of them you think could have redemption, but no, they're just terrible
Yeah, yeah.
people.
I mean, from my point of view, characters don't have to be good, they just have to be
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I'm much more of a reader where I'm invested in the characters. Story
Hmm.
can go any which way, but I read for the characters, and it doesn't matter how wacky they might be if I find something that's, makes me wanna cheer for them or I find fascinating about them, that's what really invests me in stories.
Hmm.
So I just wanna say thank you again, Cameron, for joining me for this interview, chatting about all these different topics. It was absolutely fascinating to hear your experiences and your passions. Where can everyone follow you?
All the usual places, really. At Cam Johnston on Twitter, or X if you prefer. At Cameron Johnston Blue Sky, or you can get me on Facebook. And of course, there's Goodreads. You can easily
Excellent.
find me there.
And just a reminder for everyone watching now and later with the replay, The Last Shield is coming out on August 13th. You have time to get your pre-orders in. And I mean, there is, if you're a quick reader, you can read one of Cameron's other books in between now and then as well. So thank you so much to everyone who's watched and chatted with us in the chat, to everyone watching later. And thank you so much again, Cameron, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for everyone that's watching.
Absolutely. And until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves.